Damn, son, where'd you find this?
Let's go!
Welcome to the Life of Phys podcast. I'm your host, Tyson Martin. On this episode, I have Dean Hinnant. Dean roams the highways and cities of the United States, revealing his character through his senses. His work blends sharp realism with a poetic eye, capturing the grit, grace, and fleeting beauty of everyday existence. Impelled by a spirit of freedom, love of living, and the mysticism of Americana, Dean's photos and words are an ode to the human condition, unvarnished, alive, and achingly true. Now let's hear a word from our podcast sponsor and get to the show. The Life of Phys podcast is lit by Harlow. Harlow is on a mission to empower creators to elevate their creativity with lighting kits made to last and built to inspire. These lights are bold, beautiful, and powerful because Harlow believes that your lights deserve to be seen. To learn more, follow them on Instagram at Harlow Creators or online at www.harlow.com, and don't forget to use our discount code Tyson10 to save 10% on your order.
Yeah, so my name is Dean Hinnant. I'm a photographer based in the Midwest. Originally, I'm from Richmond, Virginia. That's my hometown. So I come from the East Coast. Uh, a lot of my photography, uh, I would say, falls into like post-documentary or sort of like modern Americana. I'm not a journalism student or anything like that, so a lot of my work and a lot of what I create is based off of a self-taught history of just learning what I can. I did take one photography course in college, and that was productive, but a lot of it was sort of like Photoshop techniques and things of that nature. And the more that I leaned into, I guess, the artistic journey that I'm on, the less I had a pull or an interest towards generating work that had a lot of different layers and a lot of different components and digital pieces to it. So the bulk of what I do, even if it's like mobile photography or with a digital camera, still try to post process as little as possible in terms of like moving shapes and stuff like that. So
You want to capture as much as possible in camera.
yeah, definitely. I shoot a lot of film. I have a very significant attachment to my film camera, which we can get into in a little bit. We unpacked some of that on the last recording that we did. Um,
We had some audio issues in the last one.
yeah, I do regret people aren't going to get like a 4 hour monologue from us, but at the same time, I do think that the quality of this one will hopefully outweigh the quality over there. So
I agree. So why don't you break into your backstory, what brought you to photography, how you got, it really heavily involved in the photographic space. What led you to that?
so I have always been a generally creative person. As a kid, my interest and like my energy would always gravitate towards movies, books. I typically had less toys like in my bed and often had more literature. So like when I went to sleep, I wouldn't have stacks of action figures or other things like that. I would have piles and piles and piles of books, and I would read late into the night and then just kind of fall asleep on them. And so I've always had a general attraction to those sorts of things. Photography what probably made its first impression when I was growing up with some of my relatives. It was often something that came up at family reunions or parties because my great aunt Kathy was a photojournalist. And after her time in the Middle East, she came back and, had some of my cousins and started being a pretty significant force, I guess, in creating family activity. She was always someone that I guess the best way to put it would be like she would give me like assignments. Like she would show up at these reunions or these birthday parties or whatever. And as a little kid, give me like one of those disposable Kodak cameras, and she would give me the job of filling it up and giving it back to her before she left. And so I would go and take photos, bring them back to her. The next time we had a family get together, I got to see the photos. So that was my first, I guess, introduction to it. And that's probably not uncommon for a lot of kids like me that were born with the first digit 19 in their birth year. But yeah, it didn't really take hold, I guess, in my life until 2020. Uh, the interest in books that I brought up definitely had, how would I put it? I had a very keen interest in wanting to create books. And I guess when I was younger, I naturally associated that as I need to be a writer. So writing was a huge part of, I guess, my earlier artistic life in my teenage years and things like that. But when 2020 happened, a lot of a lot of things kind of shook into place. My parents went through a pretty significant divorce right in the middle of COVID, and there were a lot of other pieces of my life that started to dissolve. And what naturally comes with seasons like that is the opportunity to ask yourself the question of what's going to stay. And not only what's going to stay, but what's the thing that you're going to build with. And photography specifically was one of those. Uh, I had, like I mentioned, like an interest in college. And I definitely carried a camera around in college. It was kind of just known that I liked that. But I lacked a lot of inertia, or I would say a lot of self-confidence that what I was doing was actually meaningful or worth it. To your theme about mental health, which we've talked about before this episode and even before the other one, um, that definitely came from what I would consider, I guess, an unhealthy relationship with not just media, but also self expectation and what it looks like to be the greatest limiting factor to something that you love actually kind of taking shape. I think that's something that a lot of creative people struggle with. And I think in a lot of cases, we often defer to, well, if I'm not this hard on myself or I'm not this hard on what I'm doing, then someone else will do that. And it's a very easy logic to follow, but it's not very functional long term, I guess, to kind of put yourself under that kind of pressure. So photography really started to take root when I started to have to ask myself why I actually wanted to do it. Because I could go on my phone every day for years of my life and see people making things that they loved and they cared about, or see them make work that got a lot of attention or a lot of notoriety. But I think internally, I just kind of lacked a connection to why I do it. I didn't want to be the guy with the camera recording himself walking around with a camera. It never felt like a very normal identity for me to do that. It felt more like I was like playing theater, I guess would be an example. And I think in some cases, social media probably amplified that for me because most of what I was consuming was seeing examples of people doing the thing, not actually seeing the thing being done. And yeah, yeah. Uh, COVID, for all of its burdens and all of its pains and everything, was a fascinating year of my life because while that was occurring, um, an experience that it helped a lot with unpacking some of this was isolation. And you probably know what I mean by that, but there's a certain element to having to, I guess, enter like a dark cave or a dark period of your life to really silence all of the noise that's going on around you and highlight what's left and still shining, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I fully understand. COVID for me was the big turning point in my photography journey as well. It gave me a chance. I shot every single day for 3 months while I was off work. And it really amplifies your skills. It really brings up that repetitive motion. You know, you learn everything. You can quickly grab your stuff and know how to do the settings because you've done it so many times.
Sorry for the cough. I do actually have a cold, so if you hear me sniffle a little bit, it's because I'm on the tail end of that. But if at any point you need me to repeat or anything, just let me know and I'll circle back. Yeah. Um, so something that was really fascinating about COVID was an app experience called Clubhouse. There was I guess, a period of probably 6 months where it really just exploded. It was essentially like Twitter Spaces before Twitter Spaces got created, and it was tens of thousands of photographers all over the world kind of meeting each other for the first time. Uh, so at this point, like I had been practicing photography, I had been practicing film photography, but I really lacked um, a lot of the finer understandings, I guess, or the finer details of the best way to kind of work with that. As a person, I lean into the idea of not being like exclusive to one particular medium. I think like mobile, digital, film, regardless of the format size, 35, medium format, large format, like it all has its value and its place. Um, because I'm a big proponent of the medium, not exactly, but the medium is not the message. Uh, the medium is what carries the message, and sometimes it's a better vessel for it, but it doesn't make what the message says any less significant or any less valuable. Um, so in Clubhouse, I was getting the opportunity to listen and engage with folks that up until that point in my life appeared unreachable. Folks who were either very well known or very prominent or very good at what they did. They they definitely had, because of social media, a sort of shine that almost came across as these aren't the same people as me. Clubhouse really deconstructed that in a lot of positive ways. I found out just interacting with people and making friends on there, listening to people who had years and even decades more experience than I did in something, just very kindly telling me different tips and tricks on what to do with film and how to get more out of it. There was a real beautiful sense of sort of egalitarian openness. It was very democratic, and there were obviously people that really enjoyed the chance to get up and talk for a while. But um, outside of that, it was the people I met. It was just crazy. Um, I had been mulling over during that time, wanting to just get away from Virginia because of everything going on in my personal life. My parents' divorce was tough, mostly because it just wasn't very functional. And as the oldest of six kids, there was a lot, especially coming from a religious family, that came with the idea of that going away. I did not grow up in the downtown of Richmond, even though I was born there. A lot of my like teen years and later years were spent kind of out in the countryside of it, and definitely spent a lot of time in smaller towns with very small churches with very closed mindsets to the idea of boys or men or young men pursuing something that is creative because it's not exactly in line with, I guess you could say, the biblical idea of being like a provider or being someone that needs to take care of a family. And so there was always a weird sort of tension with that where I didn't feel like what was inside of me was something saying like, oh yeah, I want to be popular or I want to be famous. I want limelight. It was more like I just had all of this stuff I wanted to say and I couldn't say any of it there. And I'm not trying to be damning towards that culture because I'm very grateful for like where I've come from. And I certainly don't want that sort of pain, I guess, to be something that people hear about and think uh, I'm putting on the people that gave it. But creativity, photography, writing, all of those things gave me the opportunity to show that that's what matters more than money and more than uh, consuming and all of that. Those are very fleeting things, and I definitely, and in a very funny way, actually see more divine relationship with creativity than I do with the 9 to 5 or maxing out the 401k and all of that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, creativity is such a important factor, and being bottlenecked and not supposed to have those outlooks of being artistic and these things where you came from. I can sense the pressure that, or I can feel the pressure that would have put on you. I grew up very similar. If you didn't play sports, you weren't the person, you know.
Right.
So me choosing skateboarding over baseball or football, and then wanting to learn the guitar and wanting to learn how to draw, that wasn't the right avenue in my father's eyes. So that led to me always trying to hide what I wanted to do until I became old enough, and I knew that my art form and my way of being creative was on a skateboard. So that's
Yeah.
why when I took that step and said, this is what I want to do, whether you like it or not, I'm going to do it. So then,
Yeah.
where you
No,
grew
go
up,
for it.
you were more rural, correct?
Yeah, it was definitely a little more rural. Yeah, so my first summer job when I was 15 was on a farm during hay bales, and uh, I was in Boy Scouts. I spent all my time camping, backpacking around the Blue Ridge during the school year. Uh, just very standard, typical Southern experience with all of its pluses and minuses.
So during this time, when did you decide that you were going to put everything into photography? Like that was you, that was your expression. Um, when did that come into play? And did you have your own camera at this point? Did you figure out what camera you wanted, so on and so forth?
Yeah, yeah. So I have a Leica M6. That camera was a gift to me by my parents in 2019. It was a camera I had been wanting to get. There was a gentleman in town that had it at the time. I was working at a camera shop, and he knew that I wanted to learn film. He knew that I had been dabbling in photography for a few years, and could kind of sense that at that point I was very much in a mode where I identified the sort of romanticism or passion of photography with the type of camera that I had, which felt very much like Luke Skywalker on a farm out in the middle of nowhere, just resenting the fact that he had to do this mundane day in and day out routine. And that, as dramatic as it sounds, just felt very fitting for where I was at that point in time. Um, in the kind of family experience that I had, and this is not uncommon for a lot of people, but there is a hope, even if it's not expressed, that you are close to family. And in a lot of ways, with some of the things that I grew up in, I often had to be sort of a piece of cartilage or like a peacekeeper between some of the people in my immediate circle. And that was just kind of a role that was expected. With my parents divorcing, a lot of that just couldn't really happen anymore. A lot of the maybe identity that I had assumed or carried as kind of like a mantle or whatever, as like the oldest kid in this sort of environment, meant that I had to reorganize and decide who I was going to be without that. Anybody who has had their parents go through a divorce can understand that. Um, I mean, regardless of the birth order, because divorce is just one of those things where it's a lose lose. And in that arrangement, regardless of if it's for the better in the long run, it's difficult for kids to, I think, accept that, regardless of what age they're at. And what naturally came about was I started having anxiety and panic attacks. And we talked about this in the last recording. Um, there started to be this relationship I discovered between going out and taking photos, going into my room, kind of quieting everything and writing. That I started to identify a very distinct and very strong bridge between emotion that I couldn't process or thoughts that I had that felt like they were just taking over, and expression. A very clear relationship. And so the camera that I had was an opportunity for me to do something and make something with how I felt. A lot of times those were efforts to find a moment of peace. They were an effort to try to find stillness. There were often, a lot of them did not have any human element. And in looking back at that period of my life, specifically that year or two, that does not surprise me, because mentally, emotionally, I was at a place where I just like didn't want to fucking deal with a single person. Like I just had no bandwidth for anyone. I felt like an engine with bad spark plugs, and every time I tried to turn over, I just couldn't do it. And I had had other experiences in my life where I had kind of come and gone from Virginia, but I had never done anything specifically where I went all in on photography. Um, the camera that my parents gave me was a pretty reasonably priced one compared to the other, I guess, M6s that were on the market in 2019. The guy who was trying to sell it to me offered it to me basically for the cost of what he bought it for, which was a fraction of like the $4,000 price tag that they had at that point in time. Um, and the camera itself belonged to a National Geographic photographer named William Albert Allard. That's what attracted me specifically to it, because at that point in time, and a lot of people who have been through pretty traumatic things will understand what I mean when I say this. There's something really significant about the concept of narrative, especially when you have a lot of pain or a lot of energy that doesn't have a direction. And narrative almost acts like a river for that. It's the kind of thing that can help it just flow down, to the ocean, and it gives you the chance to watch it move. And that is exactly like what I needed to do. I had to find a way to do that. And so whenever I was done shooting, I would go get my stuff developed at my lab. And then I would be talking, or I would share the photos with people in Clubhouse, and we would discuss them. And so much of it came back to, uh, I guess, not the reviews, but maybe the input of people seeing them and going, man, like you take photos like you're from the 50s. Like you just have this sort of energy about what you create where it doesn't feel like it's, the late 2000s or whatever, or the late 2010s or the early 2020s. It feels like, uh, not Robert Frank, but just that sort of era. Things feel present but like slow. And I took that, I guess, kind of shocking as a shock. I didn't really associate that with a lot of my work at that time, but it made a lot of sense the more that I kind of dug into photo books and looked at what they were referencing. Because a lot of times there'd be people they're talking about and I had no idea who they were. That's where the idea of just kind of packing everything up and leaving started to become very enticing. I started thinking about if this is what I've been going through for the past year or so, and if I'm processing all of this shit simply for the fact that we all were locked in our houses for months at a time, whenever all of this opens up, everybody is going to be experiencing the exact same thing. Everybody is going to experience some sort of physical and mental and emotional freedom all at the same time. And once an idea kind of clicked in my head, I decided, okay, I need to do a project about like I should just drive around and not even have an agenda, but literally just go all over the country and spend 6 months doing whatever I can to try to photograph what it looks like from a person trying to feel, I guess, a sense of healing, to witness a country trying to do the exact same thing. We could spend hours, frankly, talking about like all of the bullshit that the United States in particular have been dealing with for the past few years. And there was a lot of volatility just already culturally and socially, politically, because of how siloed everybody was. And with my kind of background, uh, even though I'm a person that comes like out of the church, never really been the kind of person um, to walk around with a big stick or carry a Bible specifically to inflict something on others. That's just never it's never been the way that I guess, described my faith to myself or seen my faith to myself. And so there was a piece of God that you could say that I felt like within a lot of what people were going to start unpacking and start processing once COVID ended. Um, and I knew I wanted to show that. It it definitely came from a place of I wanted to make a photo book. Like I had a pretty clear picture in my mind of having a book created that sort of celebrated that period of time. And unlike some of the other photo projects that I do, it's the only one that's ever been bound by a specific period of 6 months. So yeah, I I went vegetarian. Like I cut out meat to save money. Um I was working in construction and I would take every opportunity I could to work out of town to make more money. So I would just live in a hotel room and I did that for 8, 9 months and just saved every penny I could. And then I just left. I just packed up and decided I would try to resettle on the West Coast. And that was kind of my loose final destination. And that's what I did. I lived with my camera for 6 months and I walked like 15 miles a day. I went everywhere from New York to Dallas to Tennessee to Montana, all up and down California, Seattle, everywhere in between, all through the Midwest. I photographed as much as I could in as many places as I could, even though as I would say like a greener photographer, I didn't have a lot of creative authority or experience to know if the work would be good. I just had to trust the idea that what I felt was true and that what I felt about the idea um, would be significant enough that it would matter to people who saw it. Um, it was also a period where I had to really, I guess, define and outline who I was making the work for. And that was also a side benefit of not being isolated, but being that focused on creative work entirely, just day in and day out, and not having to worry about going to work and then coming back and getting into a different mode. Um, I simply had to accept that I could do all of this and it could turn into nothing and it could still matter. And I think that's what I needed.
Well, it's a good way to just let all your creativity flow because you're 100% focused on the day and your camera. There's no distractions. No matter what's going on, you're for the next 6 months, it's you and your camera capturing moments that are important to the world. And whether you think they're important to the world or whether they're just important to you, some of my favorite photos are photos I take that are, I'm like, whatever. And I get home and I'm just completely blown away by all of the detail in the photo. And I know when we first started talking, we talked about you have that one photo with the American flag, the bathroom door open, and the blue jeans. And I mean, still to this day, anytime I look at that photo, I am brought back to a time where, where I grew up in Oregon with a military veteran father and a grandfather who was very proud of his country. It just brings back those kind of memories. It reminds me of the Oregon coast after a day of work in the yard with grandpa, right? Throwing your blue jeans up over the bath and then walking out into, the house with the American flag and, things like that. Are you still working on that book? Is that something you're still planning to put out? I know you've been busy. I know you moved recently. Is that plan still in effect?
Yes. Yeah. I have a friend who's a designer that reached out. He offered to do the sequencing on the book, so that is currently happening. After I came off of that trip, I definitely wanted to rush into producing something, but the more that it's sat, the more I think it's developed its own flavor and its own value. What's really interesting about it is looking back on the work now, I can see how much that trip shaped and changed the way that I approach a lot of the other work I do today. It almost was like compound interest. Like in doing it, it gave me a beefier, like visual vocabulary to work with, if that makes sense. So the plan is still to release it. I am actually doing my first gallery show, my first solo show this October. So that is kind of taking precedent. We'll see how the book falls into place with that going on. So
Congrats for that, man. I mean, that's a huge step forward.
Yeah.
The coolest stuff about your work, Dean, is the fact that you just capture moments. They aren't staged. They're not this, they're not that. They're just a moment in time with people just being themselves and just enjoying. I'm looking at your on your project section of your website, Some American Dream, where you have everything from people in a fountain walking down the street, musicians carrying their equipment, the American flag in a cowboy hat with sun and shadow. Then you have horseback riders. Like, it's such a cool connection, and they all have the same thing. They all have feeling added to the image. When you're trying to compose an image, do you take the time to set up a process when you're doing it? I know a lot with street photography, and I'm the same way. Is you just you see something, you capture it, and you move on. We both shoot. I mean, I shoot digital. You mainly shoot film. I can see my image right away and know if I like it. Do you still get, second part, do you still get surprised by the images that come back sometimes that you were like, oh, I forgot I took that, and you just fall in love with a new image?
Yeah. So I'm at the point now where I'll be driving around and I'll see something and I'll put a note in my phone and then I will drive back to it at a later date if I'm in the middle of something. Like I'll return to a place to explore it. Especially when it comes to street work. Uh, I think the key there is just being on the street and actually being present. So I'll usually put my phone on like airplane mode, and then I might put in headphones or something. And sometimes I'll shoot with music, but a lot of times I really try to avoid that. Uh, I try to do whatever I can to focus myself on being present. And that sounds corny. I know a lot of people are going to be like, okay, big surprise. But truthfully, that actually is the big surprise. Is as simple as the advice is, it's like drink water every day. It's the same concept. If you don't, you'll get dehydrated. Like you will obviously see signs of not doing it. And I think what we deal with more than any other generation right now is this struggle because there are so many opportunities for our attention to go so many places. And there are a lot of people, including myself, who even use social media and use it for, well-intended purposes of just sharing something that matters to me. But there's a ripple effect to that. There's a ripple effect to the design, the human interaction that we have today. And so when it comes to finding people and finding moments, I really look for stuff that's detached from that. So there's a long-standing, like kind of corny joke about film shooters shooting gas stations at 9 months in a still, or people that shoot Kodak shooting the corners of cars, or people that shoot Fujifilm, they shoot weddings. And I think it's hilarious that we kind of see like those cycles go on and on and on. When in reality, if you look at the through line of like all of those things, every single time the stuff that will stand out is the stuff that reminds everybody that timelessness really is just a ratio of your attention on the middle ground between the past and the present. The timelessness that we associate with work that was done 50, 60 years ago, that was timeless because they were presently noticing and observing what was going on around them. It doesn't mean that we have to go back into the 50s or we have to go to the year 2100 to find something that resonates with people. Because what will resonate with people is a century from now when we take the process of observation or the act of, I would even say, just being kind of grateful for living, and we overlay that into what we're creating. Because if that is the energy that we give, and if that is the mindset that we take into it, then the work that we make every day will matter. And I think to touch on that, the final piece I would add is my secret recipe for ensuring that is courage. And that sounds really corny, but when I wake up every day, or if I take a camera with me and I walk out the door, I cannot leave like my home or get in my car with a mindset that what I am making might only be meaningful if someone someplace decides on this. And there's a difference between like courage and like being cocky. Uh, I don't ever try to take my work and put it in people's face and say, love this. That's just not my vibe. There's nothing organic about demanding love from other people. And that goes for a lot of things. It's very human and it's very universal. Um, and when it comes to photography, I think the same thing applies for me. Like when I make work, I want to make it because it is what's happening. Um, I will certainly edit the color. I will edit towards how it feels. I will, work with the color sliders and stuff like that to really bring out, how I want the picture to take shape. But I'm not going to change what it is. I have very little interest in doing that.
I think some of the smallest details that show up in an image are so important. A lot of the stuff people will go into Photoshop and cut out, right? They'll clone over it, they'll remove it. Um, I'm the most basic editor of an image there is. I throw it in, I make it look how I feel, and then I move on in Lightroom. That's it. I don't touch anything. But I think that when you're documenting a moment, that's super important because that small detail you may erase may be a very important aspect of that image later on in time.
Yeah, and I think there's also whether it's talked about or not, or whether it's regularly talked about or not, I should say, there's an element of control. Like there's a control factor when it comes to what we're creating. A lot of times the tools that we have are presented to us as this will give you everything you need, every button that's necessary, every shutter speed required, make exactly what you want and give you complete control of the situation. But sometimes situations don't need complete control. And that is also like why when I'm talking about like editing my photos lightly or not really photoshopping them a lot, I don't want people hearing that and going, oh, so he's just, like an idealistic purist and thinks there's just no weight or value to Photoshop. And that is not what I'm saying at all. Right? What I'm saying is that, while all these conversations are happening, we also have, artificial intelligence engines that are being built to generate content and generate visual assets that match what people can do. And what naturally comes about when those things are going on is a significant, I would say, increase in anxiety within people of if they matter or if what they do is worth it. And with so much of like what your show talks about regarding mental health and things like that, um, that's why I've tried to touch on a few things today, leaning back on the idea that it really doesn't actually matter like what gets made or how it gets made. What matters is that we are alive, like we are here. And I really don't want to get into like all of the specifics, but uh, I have been on the other side of the phone or I have been in the room with people that literally just don't want to live anymore. And I have walked that with people. And I know how grim that can sound, especially talking about art and creativity. But gratitude for being alive is just something that permeates like everything I do. I just feel so thankful. And that thankfulness really is the drive behind why I make photos of whatever I see. There are definitely projects I'm doing, like some American Dream, that are focused on a pretty specific idea. And I get excited thinking about the day when they can physically exist for people so people can enjoy them. But I don't get excited about the idea of people enjoying them because that means I will get notoriety or I will get fame. The most significant people in my life, the people that made the biggest difference for me, even the biggest people creatively who have influenced me, have been folks who have time and time again reinforced the idea that creativity and creating art is one of the most important things that people can do. And I think in many regards, especially with the world that we live in today, there's so much going on and so much that is demanding energy from us that it is almost uh, it's almost a matter of life and death if we actually take the time to make something that matters. My siblings, not all of them are really interested in photography. One of my sisters is showing some interest in it, but they all have different things that appeal to them. Some of them love dancing, some of them love cooking, some of them love uh, cars and automotive engines and researching engineering and things like that. And my specific vein for whatever reason was words and visual art. Those are the things that speak to me. But I think regardless of what people do or regardless of what their passion is, it's important to have it. It's almost like the spark of life, and that's just something that should never be passed up, or I don't really think it should be given away, to things that don't inspire us. I think for as much as we have to keep a roof over our head, as much as cars are expensive, as much as groceries, don't pay for themselves, it is critical as people that we don't see our entire reason of being on this planet for doing that.
Yeah, I agree. I had this conversation when I came out of the hospital, is that I was sick of working 5 days to have 2 days to spend recovering and trying to enjoy the things that I need in my life to be in a positive place. I would love to not have to do it that way, but life is expensive, as you said. But we still need to learn how to sprinkle in the things that give us joy and give us, that hope for brighter days. On your 6 month trip there, Dean, when you were traveling around and just capturing moments, is what really drew you to some of the things you shot? Like, what was your actual overall goal when you left your house?
Specifically on that trip, I wanted to show the idea of a nation coming back to life. And when it comes to a nation coming back to life, I didn't mean that I was going to make a project that showed the national parks, having trees come back from the dead or anything exaggerated like that. Um, it was more of an idea of I wanted to show millions and millions of people coming from the same place I did. And I wanted to show that against the backdrop of a lot of colored symbols, places, landscapes that we often associate with Americanism or Americana. Um, I naturally leaned into an American summer experience, but I did that in a variety of contexts. So you'll see specifically with that work photographs that are from the cowboy festivals in Texas, but you'll also see examples of very exaggerated or almost neon colored cowboy hats and other things like that in New York City. Um, there's through lines with Americana that plenty of photographers have tapped on. But with the specific work that I did, I sofa surfed and crashed on couches that friends had. I didn't pay for a hotel room like the entire time. Everywhere I stayed was free, or I slept in rest up. Um, I wanted to lean into this sort of unbridled and almost beatnik idea of freedom. And I wanted to document people expressing that or doing things that just seemed like an everyday luxury that we didn't used to be able to do. I think about a photo of this group of women that were down in Texas. And one of the pictures is all of them getting together for like a group photo. And they're all standing like underneath this like rodeo sign or whatever in the middle of the street. And like on the left or the right hand side of the frame, you'll see like one of the ladies from the group is taking a picture with her phone, and there's a cigarette just kind of hanging in between her fingers as she does it. And it's just hilarious because it's like and we're back to smoking. No one's wearing masks, no one's worried about the respiratory health. Everybody's using nicotine and wearing matching outfits and going out and drinking at bars and having a grand old time. It's like, B-roll footage of Paramount Yellowstone series, all over the place. Um, and none of it was staged. All of it was stuff that was happening because there was this universal pride in the fact that that life was going back to normal. It wasn't an election year. There was nothing political about it. None of the work that I made was a political statement either. Um, it really was just trying to embrace the idea that America itself is not the experience of like 100,000 people. It's the experience of over 300 million people. And it's the experience of that many millions of people who have come from all over the world, have come here to try to build a life, either from a place that didn't work or from a place that couldn't do it as well. And so there's a collective definition or identity of being an American that really boils down all the way to the singular individual level. Um, if I had grown up in a different country, or if I lived in a different country and the same thing had happened, I probably would still try and do the same thing, but it would come with a different context. And as I mentioned earlier in the episode, talking about Clubhouse, there was an appeal to me, and there has been kind of a through line appeal to me about sort of the like post World War II United States. I think my grandfather was a big influence on that. He was a huge history buff, so he always talked about uh, World War II, the 50s, the big Cadillacs with the giant fins on the back of them and road trips to Miami. He was a really grounded guy, and I wish he was still around. But when I was in my early 20s before college, I spent 6 months backpacking around the country and also backpacking in Europe. And I remember before I left, he wrote a note to me, and the note was really simple. It was a quote, and it said, "Go west, young man." There are many days where I thought about just getting a tattoo of that in his handwriting, because it really felt like a compelling and reassuring thing. Um, he was a big advocate for living life as full as you can, but not doing it to the point where you're down and out on your luck because you've spent everything. He cared a lot about the fact that he grew up in the States, and he wanted to go off in World War II, but because of his health he couldn't, and so there was always this piece of him that felt like it missed out because of that. And I don't necessarily see him and myself as the exact same people, but I think a lot about how he had this kind of passion and care about something that he never really got to live. And as an older person, telling a grandkid of his to essentially take the chance you have and don't end up the same way, but saying it in a gentle, kind, encouraging manner really was I think a big motivator for me. And I think especially during COVID and getting the opportunity to kind of reflect on that and remember some of that was a big catalyst for deciding, I don't have a reason not to do this. I don't have a reason not to pick up a camera and go make photos. There's nothing going on in my life that says I can't go and do a project showing people that life is beautiful. There's literally nothing stopping me from doing that.
I think you should get those words tattooed on your body because that's an important reminder
Yeah,
of that turning point, right? Whether we think about it now or you think back to it later on, those words were meant for a reason. They were meant for you to become this explorer and this person of capturing moments in time. I think that would be such a great honor to him.
I agree. There's a photo I'm trying to find real quick because we talked about it the last time we recorded this show, and I wanted to bring it up again because when I was on that trip, uh, I kept a small journal. On that journal, I was going through my stuff before my move up here to Nebraska, and I was packing up boxes, and it was one of the little field notebooks that he had given me, and so I went back and this I found this prayer that I wrote, which is crazy, but uh, it's it's from November 9th of 2011, and I said, God, I would really like to try photography. I would love to have a nice camera so I could take photos when I travel, or even to keep as inspiration for writing. And that's all I wrote. And I remember finding that and like my back going cold. I I think sometimes it's easy in a world of possibilities to look at all the things that we haven't done yet, look at all the places we haven't seen, or the sites we haven't been to, or the people that we've never, had the opportunity to know. And I think I it's almost humbling when I go back and I find something like that and I see that the biggest wish that I had traveling all over the world at that time was just the opportunity to know what I now know how to do. just effortlessly and fluently. It puts a lot into perspective.
What a connection. What a moment where you just wrote some simple words that meant something to you, and look where you are now. Look what you've been able
Mhm.
to achieve. So, I mean, that's a great point for everybody. If we have hopes or we have dreams that we really want to be a part of our future and a part of our lives, sometimes writing them down or putting them out to the universe helps make things happen.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I think there's a I think there's so much that we still haven't even seen. I mentioned this the last time we talked, and I could probably talk about it for a while, but we we collectively being people online, uh, I think we suffer from this idea that there are too many people doing what we do, that there's an overabundance instead of a scarcity of people that make art. And because there's an overabundance and not a scarcity, that we matter less or that there's less value to what we do. And frankly, I think it's bullshit. Uh, it, if every person in the world had the ability to use the exact same visual language to share their life, we still wouldn't even have enough time just as people, even with every resource at our disposal, including AI, to get the opportunity to fully understand each other. Humanity is so much deeper than that. Or what we are as people is so much deeper than that. And I think it's important to remind ourselves, because there literally is nobody else living what we're living. And whether what we're living ends up in the MoMA or not isn't the point. I think the point is that creating is not reducing. It's not like we're just generating all of these things to sit on pallets in Costco and get purchased just so people can come back in the next week and consume the same thing. That's not what we're doing. I think the platforms and the access we have to seeing art as abundantly as we do is a privilege. I think it's a gift. Um, and I guess my encouragement to anybody listening to this is to just remember that, because we all have archives and hard drives and all of this work, projects and ideas and hopes and dreams and all of this stuff that we're spending energy trying to bring into the world. But it's going to take its own time and its own way. And once it gets made, that's the gift. The gift is not the response that it gets. That's just the whipped cream or the cherry or the sprinkles or whatever on top of it. The real meat of it all is that we did it, that we had the courage to believe in it enough that it became true.
Oh, 100%. So it's been such a great conversation, Dean. We took our 4 hours before and kind of were able to compress it into an hour.
Yeah.
I do plan to try to save some of the clips from the 4 hour one when I have some more time to really focus on it. But anything that's still usable and it's not really, really muddy in the audio. Where's the best place for people to find you?
I'm on Instagram. That's the best place to find me. That's where I'm most active. It's Dean underscore Hinnant. So it's DEAN underscore HINNANT. I am on Threads, but I'm not very active on there. You're welcome to follow me, but I don't post that much. Instagram is mostly where I post. It's mostly where I share. It's usually where I network with people. I do have a website as well. That's in the link in my bio. And I have a wait list for my photo book. So if you are interested in that, and if you like being subscribed to things that don't blow up your inbox, I promise you, I don't have the energy or time to put you in a marketing funnel and send you alerts like 6 times a day. So you can sign up for that. And believe me when I tell you, the first email you'll probably get from it is probably when the book is ready.
Nice. Too
Yep.
many places you sign up and you get 18 emails a day.
Yeah, it's so bad.
Yeah.
I do project management as a day job, and what's hilarious is, like at work right now, I have over 90 projects I'm currently overseeing, and some of them are 5 figures, some of them are 7 figures, and that is what I do during my day outside of photography. So it's really interesting, being in that world and operating in that, and then seeing the sort of the overlay, I guess, with some of my creativity. Um, but yeah, when it comes to photo projects, there are a few on my site, and there are more to come. I'm kind of building out the framework for the next couple of years of exactly what I want to do. So yeah, if you connect with me, I'll do my best to follow you back. I am actually really bad at doing the follow for follow game. So if that happens, don't be offended. Um, but uh, but yeah, so that's where you can find me. I am also starting to put stuff on Substack. That's a whole new platform for me as well. I really enjoy writing, so what I'm hoping to do this year and going into next is start to put together a sort of a relationship between my photography and my words, and I think that has a lot of promise to it. So,
Well, I think we got everything that we need. I look forward to continuing following your work. Excited to see this book come to fruition.
thank you, dude. Sounds good. Thank you, Tyson. Have a good one, man.
You too, buddy. Have a good one. Bye. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Life of Phys podcast. I hope you've enjoyed our show, and don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review. Your feedback helps us continue to bring you content and the stories of our incredible guests. And remember to stay connected with us on all social media platforms. It's at LIFE_OF_PHYS or on the internet at www.lifeofphys.com. Thank you for tuning in and have a great day.